Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, my dear students. We are going to learn the osteology of ulna today. So ulna is the bone of the forearm. It is the medial bone of the forearm and it is homologous to the fibula of the lower limb. The ulna does not participate in the wrist joint formation. Hence, it is similar with that of the fibula, while it provides surface for the attachment of muscles. Now, ulna is a long bone and it has two ends, an upper end, a lower end, and a shaft. The upper end has certain features. It has an olecranon process, a coronoid process, a trochlear notch, and on the lateral side there is a radial notch. So there are four important features which you can observe in the upper end of the ulna: olecranon process, coronoid process, trochlear notch, and on the lateral side you can see there is a notch which accommodates the head of the radius, which is called as the radial notch. The first process, which is called as the olecranon process, it projects upwards from the shaft of the ulna and it has five surfaces: a superior surface, anterior surface, medial surface, lateral surface, and a posterior surface. So you see, this is the posterior surface of the olecranon process, which is subcutaneous and it forms the point of the elbow. The anterior surface is continuous with the trochlear notch, while the medial and the lateral surfaces, they are continuous with the shaft of the ulna. The coronoid process is sharp, projected like a crow's beak. It projects upwards and its superior surface contributes in the formation of the trochlear notch. The coronoid process in its lower part has a tuberosity, a roughness, which is called as ulnar tuberosity. Just lateral to the coronoid process, there is a notch, the radial notch. This radial notch accommodates the head of the radius to form the superior radio-ulnar joint. Below the radial notch, there is a depressed area which accommodates the radial tuberosity. Behind this, there is a sharp crust which is called as supinator crust. So, in the summary, we have certain features in the upper end: olecranon process, coronoid process, a trochlear notch which is hook-like and it accommodates the trochlea of the humerus. The upper end has an ulnar tuberosity, a roughness below the coronoid process. The upper end has a radial notch to accommodate the head of the radius. On the lateral side, it has a depressed area to accommodate the radial tuberosity and an elevated ridge which is called as the supinator crust. The shaft of the ulna is triangular on the cut section. It has three borders and it has three surfaces. So the ulna has an anterior border which you can see it is rounded and it starts from the medial side of the ulnar tuberosity. So the anterior border, which you can observe over here, it is rounded, it is running downward to reach the head of the ulna. The second border is the lateral border, or you can say it is the sharpest border, the interosseous border. Over here, the interosseous membrane is attached. Now when we trace this border upwards, it starts from the supinator crust. From the supinator crust it begins, it runs downward, it is sharp in its upper part and it ends behind at the styloid process, which is a feature present in the lower end. The third border is the posterior border. and you can see that the posterior border starts from the posterior surface of the olecranon process. It runs downward to reach up to the styloid process of the ulna. So we said that ulna has three borders. We are going to revise our borders. Anterior border facing anteriorly, rounded in appearance. It has an interosseous border which is facing laterally starting from the supinator crust, and it has a posterior border which starts from the posterior surface of the olecranon process. The ulna has three surfaces. It has an anterior surface, it has a medial surface, and it has a posterior surface. So the anterior surface, it runs between the anterior border and the interosseous border. So this part of the bone is called as the anterior surface. It has a foramen which is called as nutrient foramen, through which the nutrient artery enters into the bone. It has a medial surface which is facing medially, and it is giving attachment to the muscles. Then there is a posterior surface which is present between the interosseous border and the posterior border. So see, this one is the posterior surface. The posterior surface is divided into two parts, upper part and a lower part, by the presence of an oblique ridge. So there is an oblique ridge on the bone which divides the posterior surface into upper part and a lower part. While in the lower part, there is a vertical ridge which divides the posterior surface into a medial and a lateral part. The lower end of the ulna. Now the lower end of the ulna has two features. It has a rounded head which is called as head of the ulna, and it has a pointed projection which is lying posterior-medially. This projection is called as styloid process. So this is head of ulna, and this smaller projection is called as styloid process. It is lying posterior-medially. The head articulates with the radius to form the inferior radioulnar joint. Now posteriorly, between the head and the styloid process, there is a groove for the passage of tendon, the tendon of extensor carpi ulnaris. The tendon of extensor carpi ulnaris passes from this tendon. So we have completed the osteology of ulna, but the last and the most important thing is the site determination of the ulna. Now this bone which I am holding in my hand, it belongs to the right side. How did I say that it belongs to the right side? For it, you have to remember three important points. The first point, which structure belongs to the superior part, or you can say which is the upper end. So identification is very easy. The upper end processes the features, the olecranon process, the coronoid process, as well as the trochlear notch. Second point that you have to remember, that which structure should lie medial or lateral. So you have to remember that ulna is a medial bone, and the radial notch is always present on the lateral side. So the radial notch will come on the lateral side of the human body. Upper part, the lateral feature, which is the radial notch, and third important thing is what structure should be placed anteriorly. So it is very simple that the coronoid process, the crow's beak, should be placed anteriorly. So when you are going to accomplish all these 3 points, easily you can determine the side. So what are the 3 points? The upper end having the processes, olecranon and the coronoid process. The second point, the radial notch is always laterally placed. And the third point, coronoid process faces anteriorly. So this bone belongs to the right side of the human skeleton. Thank you so much dear students. Hope you like my video. You have to like it and you have to share it. Allah Hafiz.